To everybody who has joined, welcome to our webinar. I'm Kim Egan. I'm one of the new co-presidents, and we have Crystal Pickett on the phone, who is our secretary, who's going to be helping moderate all the comments and get the documents up when it's time to do that. And we will have a few other Horse Council Executive Committee folks joining. But most importantly, we have our three victims for this webinar with us. We have Senator Katie Fry Hester on the phone. She represents Howard and parts of Carroll County. We have Delegate Guyton on the phone. She represents Baltimore County. And we have Secretary Brinkley on the phone from the Governor's Administration and the Department of Commerce, also on the phone. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a brief intro from everybody on their, not from everybody, from the panelists on their particular areas of focus today. And then we'll do a few moderated panel questions, and then we're going to open it up as a Q&A to everybody else. So if you have a question or a comment, please put it in the chat, and Crystal will be keeping an eagle eye on the chat. And if you could also mute yourself in the meantime.
I think I've muted all the people coming in. Okay. So if when we get to the Q&A, we'll unmute or ask people to unmute. Right. But I think right now everybody coming in is, except for our speakers, because they're already on, are muted.
Great. Okay, so let's begin. Let's begin with you, Senator. You have successfully gotten the Days End bond bill of quite some magnitude through the General Assembly this session. And can you tell us a little bit about what you had to do on the legislative end, especially towards the end of the session, to get that bill through the legislative process? And then Delegate Guyton later will tell us how you get one started. Go, Katie. You're on mute. Can you did you mute her, Crystal?
I didn't mean to.
Okay, I think you guys can hear me now.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for having me, and thank you to everybody for joining me. Days End is a wonderful, wonderful asset to Western Howard County, and I was just so pleased, along with Secretary Brinkley, to be able to, bring through that LBI. So LBI stands for a Legislative Bond Initiative. It's also fondly called a bond bill. And that's a request for funding to support a specific local non-governmental capital project. And so with the sponsorship, any applicant may request funding from the General Assembly for the capital project. Funding requests generally exceed, available resources every year. So it really helps to know your legislator and know who they need to influence in order to get your bond bill passed. I thought it might be helpful just to talk quickly about the eligibility for these projects. Days End was a great example because, first of all, the project must be capital in nature. It's got to deal with land or structures, not salaries or benefits. Number two, projects have to have a useful life of 15 years. And I certainly hope, ours will be there a lot longer than that. And number three, projects must serve a specific purpose, a public purpose, to benefit people in the state of Maryland, not just one specific group. So to submit a request, applicants complete the LBI request form, which is quite short. And you can either, Brandon can put that in the chat now, or you can reach out to whoever your legislator is, and they'll be able to send you that form. And then the deadline, so once I had that form, the deadline for request is the 55th day of session. Now, session's only 90 days, so I usually try to get mine in as quickly as possible so I'm ahead of schedule. And then after that request is submitted, the Department of Legislative Services, enters it into official proceedings. And the next stage there is a fact sheet. And it's generally about 5 pages. It's a 5-page document where requesters provide information on a variety of topics, things like legal status, project descriptions, timelines, matching funds. And that information is all really important to fulfill statutory requirements. legislators really rely heavily on the information that you all supply in those fact sheets. And if heaven forbid you forget the fact sheet prior to the committee hearing, that can be, the chance, it can be a real missed opportunity. Then there's something called LBI Saturday, which is basically where all these legislative bond initiatives, it's much more fun in person than on Zoom, I gotta tell you, but they're each heard by each chamber's budgetary committee, which usually takes place in March. And it's one of the busiest days in Annapolis for these committees. Grantees the presentation should be short, brief, and really focus on making the most compelling case you can for your project. So with Days End, we really stressed that this was the only, place in the state of Maryland that was rescuing these types of horses. And we were really rescuing horses from all over the state. So while it was in Howard County, it really had a state impact. So it's kind of an art and a science, I guess, to how these funding decisions and projects are made. Everything gets considered. The committees begin making decisions. And while you request a certain amount, the committee may change your amount in any direction or strip it entirely. Since this was an odd number year, 2021, the House Appropriations Committee began with a capital budget process, just like they began the operating budget process. Next year, it will be an even number year, so the process will begin in the Senate. And when you request the LBI, you can track your initiatives to a limited degree under the budget tab on the MGA website. But really, it's probably helpful to call the office of your legislator to figure out exactly what's going on. And then once a reprint of the capital budget is available, explain amendments before the vote is held. But rarely do people discuss these legislative bond initiatives on the Senate floor. And then once the budget is passed, the Department of General Services is responsible for managing and distributing the grant funds. I will note that there's many places along the way to advocate for this funding. So we were able to get $500,000 for Days End. The $250,000 came because we wrote to the governor, to Secretary Brinkley, and said, hey, we'd really like to do this project. It's a great opportunity to buy the firehouse next door. And so the first 250 actually appeared in the governor's budget. Then you have two more opportunities. You have an opportunity case. The House did not add any additional funds, but the Senate chamber added the next $250,000. And that's how we got $500,000. So during that process, it's just, for me, I worked very closely with our capital budget chair, Senator Peters. I mean, he is, the man to know in these instances, and it's just really important that you, you can stress the uniqueness, how you meet all the requirements, and that you just kind of keep reminding folks that this is a priority in this district. I hope that was helpful.
That was very helpful. Thank you. And thank you again for everything you did for Days End. And I'm not saying that just because they're right down the road for me. Secretary Brinkley also has to go to an important appointment, so perhaps we could turn to you now. You are on the governor's side of the equation, and you worked with Katie on the Days End bond bill, as she just said. So can you give us an overview of what the view looks like from where you are?
Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit from where Katie was, and I think where Michelle will go on it. But as you look at bond requests overall, there are generally two avenues you take. One is the governor's side, which is the larger portion of it. Our requests last year, we put in $1.1 billion in bond requests. The legislative side is left to the discretion of the legislature. And that's why you need to reach out to the members of the legislature. But they get, I think it's $15 million in each chamber to decide how they want to break it out. So the first step, and typically the larger opportunities are through the governor's request, but you should still maintain communication with the members of the legislature, because you don't want them to be surprised by something in their district. So when you write a letter to the governor, and that's what it takes, I'm receiving them now. And yesterday I went on 2 site visits up in Cecil County, for what are going to be bond requests coming up. And then I also got to tour the Fair Hill project. I had competed there 40 years ago, and now to see it now with some of the sprinklers going and everything else, and we got to go back and tour some of the cross country venues and everything else. It was very exciting to see that project come along as the 5-star that it's going to be. When you write the letter to the governor and even to the legislature, consider the who, what, when, where, why, and how. What is the project? Who does it benefit? How does it benefit the state as a whole? How much is it going to cost? And just address those questions that you go through. Now, one thing I want to just short circuit real quick is I've had requests from people that want to fund private projects. If it is not a nonprofit or has some connection in that way, shape, or form, it's discounted. It's not going to happen. So, make sure there's an education aspect to it that's not owned, that someone can sell the property and then profit by some of the infrastructure that was put in. Katie referenced the 15-year. That's what we use as our definition on capital projects. Something's going to last 15 years or more. There are some variances as you come through. In some instances, a vehicle might be counted. But principally, if that has some major healthcare thing, we're going through something now where we have these mobile hospitals that are going around, and we expect to get more than 15 years out of them, even though they might be a vehicle, something along those lines. So that's the aspect there. It has to be on the governor's side. The governor would submit it on the capital side. The legislature then gets their fingerprints all over it. That's why you have to maintain that communication. They can adjust things on the governor's side and add things on the legislative side, and they can even move money around. Typically, we are very concerned to know where you are in your timeline. You might come in and say, I have $1 million request, but I'm just doing planning now. It'll happen next year and in the subsequent years when we got to wrap it all up. That's helpful for us to know because we do an awful lot of time scheduling or cash flowing projects. If something's not ready to go, and it happens a lot, you'll see it with a state police barrack or something at the university where they had an interruption in supplies or materials. Therefore, that project might be pushed back a year, but possibly even 2. Or if there's a court case involved in it, 3, 4, 5 years. We can accelerate and do other projects and then put it back into the flow. So just make sure that you have those communications. Once it's passed by the legislature, then it comes to the governor's desk. The capital budget is the only budget that the governor can do a line item veto. He hasn't done it but one time in 8 years, but he has the right, he or she has the right to do that. In which case, then the legislature just has to deal with it. But presuming that it becomes part of the capital budget bill, then it drops into DGS's lap. That's the Department of General Services. They handle the timing on when it goes out. They certify that all of your match funds have been made. Typically, I'm just backing up here a little bit. Typically, we want to see at least a 50 cents on the dollar match. If you're going to ask us for $1, we want to see that there's $1 coming in. You'll hear legislators and DGS use terms like hard match and soft match. A hard match is, I'm going to write a check for, the $100,000 and the state's going to cough up $100,000. A soft match might be real estate's invested. It might be that you have an HVAC contractor who's willing to come in and do some of the HVAC work and give you the financial benefit from that. Those are things that are known as soft matches. There might not necessarily be dollars. There are dollars attached to it, but it may not be a cash attachment. And DGS is very familiar with the intricacies of how all that will work and the timing. And the first thing that you have to do is also go to the Maryland Historical Trust's website and satisfy that whatever you're going to do doesn't violate something on a historical project. So once you get into there, you can see all the checks. And then it comes to the Board of Public Works for when the money ultimately goes out. Since there was a lot of reference to day's end, that all happened this past April, or at least it was finalized in April. But the budget that all that was attached to doesn't start until July 1. Therefore, the money can go out anywhere from July 1 until June 30th of 2022. And even when we do these bond allocations, they can stay on the books for 3 years afterwards. Let's say that there's an interruption, because I know that that project had to deal with the the old fire hall there in Lisbon. And if there's some interruption or steel prices spiked, which they have done through all this kind of thing, and maybe they got on a year's delay, it wouldn't interrupt the funding for the project. It might interrupt the completion date for it, but they could still go ahead and do the project, and the commitment would remain on the state's books for, I think it's 3 years afterwards. After that, they come back in and we can reallocate the money, but typically also there'll be a legislation bill to pass to extend the date on it. And then you just have to justify how and why it happened. So I'll stop there.
We do have a question. Should we go ahead and put it out there, Kim?
Sure, it was a good question.
Okay.
The question is, can a for-profit nevertheless apply for capital funding if the funding is going to be for a social services such as therapeutic riding or mental health or something along those lines? Or is it literally only available to 501c3s?
Well, not necessarily 501c3s. Remember, 501c category has about 35 or 45 different categories. A 501c13 is a cemetery, I think, and
Right.
they go along.
Or a 501c6.
Yeah, it could be a 501c6 or something like that. They do want to see a nonprofit status. So you might be having some type of programming going on where you have the mental health, you might have disabled coming in or whatever it is. But if the capital project and the sticks and bricks are going to stay with the owner of the property, no, it's not eligible.
Okay.
But there might be some other capital links that they can get into for. So we run into this with churches sometimes, but we'll still, because they're providing a service in the community, but they may not be, they certainly aren't privately owned. So there's no real barrier to, is it a religious organization or something like that? But we do want to see that it's nonprofit in some way, shape, or form.
So just to clarify, David, if I could piggyback on this question, in my experience working with these clients when I had the equerry, so many of these programs, therapeutic type of programs, are on property that is privately owned. So the owners of the property own of the program. The program itself might be a not-for-profit, but they're renting from the owner who's running the program, who's executive director, but the owner owns the land. So because it's a capital project, they would not be eligible because it's not the C3 that owns the land. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's basically is accurate with what you're hearing. Perhaps a case can be made if the nonprofit comes in and says, we're on so-and-so's ground, land, and we have a 25-year lease to have this building, and they do a leasehold improvement to that aspect, or if they have a ground lease where they're going to see that, then that would convey, should that person do it. That rarely happens. I mean, let's be honest about it. You know what I do professionally when I'm not here doing estate planning and retirement planning for people and things like that, that a lot of times those are set up and they have a very important social benefit by providing riding and rehabilitation services, but there also is a tax benefit to the person that can help sponsor it. If they do something along those lines, they can offset some of the costs and all that here. So remember, we're talking here capital side, which is putting up an indoor arena or doing some other type of facilities, and seldom can capital improvements like that be relocated. Not always.
So the solution or the advice then to said, my therapeutic program that's on the land that I own would be for my therapeutic program, who at this point should be independently organized as a C category, to enter in with a long-term lease with myself for the property. And that would be our advice to so many of our members and people in the community that have these programs. You need to have your your nonprofit needs to enter into a long-term lease arrangement with you as the owner.
Yeah, and even at that, I would submit that they have a long uphill road to climb. We had, I remember 20 years ago, I had a request down in Urbana from the guy that owned an old historic project there and wanted people to come in and see where Civil War soldiers had written on the walls. But it was still his primary residence and his business. And they were just automatically disqualified by that.
Yeah.
The Days Inn is a lot different because
Right.
it is entirely nonprofit. It owns all those assets. And then the facility that they're taking over is the former firehouse, which, you know, they had to go through another nonprofit along those lines and try to make some accommodations there.
Okay.
It's arguable that if you had a pony club that was doing something, they might be able to qualify along those lines. In fact, you know, as a member of the Frederick Pony Club years and years ago, we did get some money for the Frederick Pony Club grounds back when I was in the House and Senate years and years ago. But those were small grants from a recreational point of view.
Yeah. Well, the other big horse facility bond bill this year was Graham Equestrian Center in Baltimore County. So perhaps this is a good time to segue to Delegate Guyton and Secretary Brinkley and Senator Hester. If you have to run to your next thing before we get a chance to say goodbye, thank you so much.
I'm okay for the next 3 minutes and I'll be monitoring.
Okay. So Delegate Guyton, how do you advise our horse people to go about beginning this process? And, you know, who do they call? Do they call you directly or the equivalent of you, or do they do something else?
Oops, excuse me, I think I just lost myself. Yeah, we're not quite ready for that. If it's okay, we'll just hold off on that for 1 second. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I represent District 42B, and which is, most of you know, because there are probably more horses in my district than there are voters. So we can allow them to vote, we would be in great shape up there. But we did get that bond bill through this year, and yes, the answer is come to us with your needs and your concerns. I believe, and I want to introduce Corey Johns, who's in your right-hand corner. He'll wave his hand. He's my chief of staff. And so most of this will go through our office staff, my chief of staff. Corey knows the ins and outs of this process better than I do, I'm sure. I think one of the most surprising things to me the first year I was in the General Assembly is that I had this money to give out to people and no one was asking for it. That we actually had to go out and search for projects to fund. You know, don't leave us in that situation, right? This is basically a gift to you, to nonprofits, and to us as legislators to be able to help our districts. So go to your legislator, go to your delegate or to your senator. Ideally, you would work with both a delegate and a senator to put this in on both sides of the street in Annapolis. That's the way, in my opinion, you get the most money. And my projects have ranged from $25,000 to $500,000 over the past 3 years. Again, some I've had to go out and actually search for and put calls out, like what do these nonprofits need? And you know, others have started, since the longer I've been there, have started to come to me more easily. And they've ranged from you know, school playgrounds to the Graham Equestrian Center to my favorite, not necessarily my favorite project to talk about because it's so ironic, is that we got $150,000 to put a sprinkler system in a fire museum. So it was just kind of anything, right? Anything you need that fits the requirements of a legislative bond initiative, we'll be happy to put in for you. So who do you ask? You should have, I hope you all have some relationship with one of your representatives. If you don't, make that relationship. That's what we're here for. I love to hear from you. I'm sure my colleagues do as well. Many of you have 3 delegates and 1 senator. Some of you may only have 2, as in my district, and a few of you maybe only have 1. So that's your choice, right? It has to be an elected official who puts this in for you from your district. Please come early. Don't wait until the last minute to make us scramble around to figure out where our money is going to go. First of all, it makes it harder for us. And second of all, it makes it less likely that you will get what you need, because we may already have several projects in the works. Generally, these things do happen, at least in our office, close to the last minute, and we'd prefer not to have that happen this year. So start talking to us now. If you know you have a project, or maybe you don't have a project ready to go right now, but you're gonna have it ready to go next year, put a bug in somebody's ear so that they can save a spot for you when you're ready, when you're shovel ready. And I think that's probably the most effective way to make sure that you're sort of on the list. Now, I'm gonna be really honest, because that's what I do. I was asked to talk about, who you should ask to sponsor your legislation. And it's not necessarily a political party decision, but you can actually go on the Legislative Bond Initiative website, and you can see all of the projects that were funded and all of the projects that were not funded. Again, both Republicans and Democrats get money for their districts. That's the way it should be. But there are certain things that if you have more than one representative to choose from, to be honest, some people are more likely probably to get funding than others, and you should be aware of that. Go look at that list, see who's been successful in the past, see who hasn't. And again, it's not about party. Sometimes, obviously, if you have a delegate who's involved in a recent scandal, you probably don't want to ask that person. Go to one of the others. If you have somebody who voted against the capital budget, right? This is something that people don't pay attention to. If they had a bond bill approved years ago and they voted against that bond bill in the capital budget some people will do that to make a point, they're probably not going to get money in it again. So just to be right up front, pay attention to those things. And sometimes that does matter on your bond bill. The other thing is, I would ask, go to somebody you think is going to believe in your project. So my background is I love horses, I love animals. So that's already in your favor. But in addition, my background's in psychology, mental health, disability services. So a project like Graham Equestrian Center, which is actually serving that population and also promoting the horses in the district, that's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to work to get that done for you. A project like First Fruits Farm, which was the other project that we got funded this year, I'd been working in food distribution and they were part of that work. So those things I believed in. I would ask the people you're considering putting your bill in, I would ask them how many bills they have. If they have 10, they're going to have to pick and choose, right? They're going to have to rank them. Maybe you want to go with someone. I don't think we've put in more than 2 ever, and we've always gotten them funded. I may put in 3 this year. It's not an impossibility, but I won't put in 10 because then I'll have to pick who do I want to get funded and who do I not. And that's not a position I want to be in. But if they do have many, then you do want to ask that question. Are you going to champion mine? Will you help my bill get through? And hopefully they will be honest with you and tell you maybe you want to go to someone else, or I'll make sure that I do. And then you want someone who has a pretty good relationship with the people making the decisions. We don't make the decisions, but we beg for consideration. And some of us are really good at pestering and begging, and others don't do that as much. Corey is smiling because I'm one of those people, right? I want my bills funded and I want my bills passed. But most of us do. So keep those communication lines open. And then finally, I would say, don't ask for more than you need. You have to be able to justify what you're asking for. So if you come in and you say, well, a couple $1 million would be great for my project, but it's obvious that you really are overshooting and you don't need that much, it's going to be less likely to be funded. Okay. And then now's the time for that sheet that you had. You will come in, you will have a conversation with us or with your delegate, with your senator. You'll tell us about your project. We'll say, I love that project. And yes, I would like to do it. And then you're gonna make sure that it fulfills, this is a checklist, the basic checklist. If it doesn't fulfill these basic things, then you don't wanna put it in, or you wanna wait until you're ready. So does it have a public purpose? And I know some of these things have already been spoken about already. Is it gonna last at least 15 years? I will say that the lease for the property, the 15-year lease for the property has worked for several of my bond bills. So I wouldn't discourage people purely because they don't own the land. There is a way to do that. And then, Is the project religious in nature? Those are less likely to be funded. Is it ready to go, right? Do you have sufficient funding to finish it? If the legislature or the governor's office gives you 500,000, can you come up with the rest? Now, this year was the first year that you didn't have to match it dollar to dollar. And I don't know where we're going with that in the future. I have heard that we're not going to require matching funds, but I can't guarantee that that's going to be the case. But this year it was great because you didn't have to have matching funds, but you did have to show that if we give it to you, you can finish the project. And then if you'll go to the next one really quickly, this is the fact sheet that you'll need to fill out. This is what we fill out to introduce your bill. And I just want to say there are a couple of other things that sometimes are taken into account that people don't think about. If your project is going to create employment for people in a district, even if it's not directly related to what you're doing, put that on your application. Make sure we know that. That's something they take into account. And if in some delegations, we may be split, right? We may have different projects. In that case, you're going to want to go to our county delegation and to the other members of that delegation and say, could you please rank my project, right? Even if they're not the sponsor. Hopefully the person you have sponsoring will do that for you. So if you could go to the
We're making it easy, Crystal.
I know,
request form.
I'm trying.
The request form. So
It keeps coming up as the same one. Do you see?
yeah, so this is the next thing you would do, and that's fine. You can leave it on there. The legislative request form is 1 page. I'll hold it up. You can't see it really. I'll hold it up for you. And it's real simple. All you have to know when you put in the request is how much money do you want, and basically what's it for, and who are our contacts. We can do that, you know, in a few minutes, and we can put it in for you. But after that, we're going to need you to do the lead work, to do the form that she just had up, and hopefully Crystal can put back up for us. This is the longer one that Senator Hester was discussing.
This one you were looking for?
Yes. So this is, and this is up to you, right? The first one's up to us. This is up to you. And if you're able to scroll through, this is about 5 or 6 pages. And this is where you're going to really have to have your budget worked out. You're going to have to tell us where your money is coming from.
I have 1 page. Sorry.
I keep trying to do it on mine. But you basically just need to have your ducks or your horses in a row, if you don't mind the pun, and know what you need, when you need it, and what you're going to use it for. Again, I have had good success. I haven't had a bond initiative yet that hasn't been funded, but I'm pretty judicious with mine. And that may be the reason. So, you know, I
have a quick question for you on the list of requirements.
That's basically all I have. I'm happy to answer questions if I can. I have a feeling Senator Brinkley probably knows more about this process than I do, but.
I have a quick question for you based on the eligibility document that you shared. One of the questions on there was, do you have funding already from the state from another pot of money? Mm-hmm. Is that does that disqualify you if you do or not?
You are not supposed to use this funding for anything else that like municipal government could fund, or that you have other big pieces of funding from the state or the governor. Sometimes you get, I'm trying to think of a good example. I'll use the state fair for an example. The state fair gets little bits and pieces from all over. We don't put and that's in my district, right? And I support them very much. We don't put a legislative bond initiative in for them because I don't think that they would be qualified because they are getting so many other different grants from the state. But it is possible, and I think Secretary Brinkley alluded to this, it is possible to get some money from LBI and some money in the capital budget. Those are different. So you can do both of those, and I've seen that.
Or could you get like a capital grant from Maryland Historic Trust and an LBI, maybe? No.
That I don't want to misspeak. Yeah. I think that that's something we can get back to you on. Corey, make a note of that. I can get you the answer.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head. But.
We've talked about success stories, grammar question at day's end. What would you say to us are the most common mistakes people make trying to get an LBI that you think we could easily avoid?
Yeah, I think I already spoke to that a little bit, and that's, pick your sponsor, make sure they don't have too much on their plate, right? That they're willing to put yours first or second. or even third. A lot of people get 3, but you don't want them to put yours 5 or 6, right? Make sure you're ready to go. Don't put it in for something that really isn't ready to go, because they will sniff that out. You won't get your money, or worse. We had a project in my district that got funded and wasn't in time, so the money had to be repaid, right? So that happens too, right? You have to be ready to go, or really, really close to it. Be very honest about what your finances are too, because the same thing could happen. And again, try to find a sponsor that's going to, work well with others and get this done for you. So, but the biggest thing, Corey, wouldn't you say the biggest problem is just have your information and have it in on time? If you don't have it in on time, it won't be considered. And then there's nothing we can do for you. So,
And also don't be afraid to ask, right?
yeah, sure.
Right.
Sure. If you don't
You don't
know,
have to go searching for projects.
and we will do the research for you if you're not sure if your project qualifies, like the question you just asked me about the historical trust. We would sit down and meet with you about that project, and we would do the research to see whether it would qualify or not before putting it in and letting you know. So yeah, but do as much of that as you can.
Yeah.
So we have a good question. Do all documents that are submitted, do they become public record?
Ooh, that is a really good question. I can't speak to it 100%. My guess is going to be yes, they should. I can't imagine that they wouldn't be, but do I know that to be 100% true? I almost do. That's my answer.
So even if that's somebody, an organization's financials, that would be available, their balance sheet, their profit and loss, whatever.
Which if
Well,
they're,
you don't have to put, yeah. So if you go back, if you look at the bond initiative fact sheet, it tells you exactly what you have to disclose. It's not, it's a long sheet, but it's really about the project. So for an example, you need to tell us how much the project costs. You need to tell us what you're spending for different things, like how much is your design, your construction, your equipment, that sort of thing. Your donations, you do have to disclose, I don't believe you have to disclose exactly where every donation is coming from, but you have to be able to say we have this certain amount of money. And that's just to make sure that the project is viable.
So it's fairly anodyne.
Yeah, I don't really see anything else I don't think you have to open up your bank account to do
So
that.
that wouldn't be information that isn't
Yeah.
already required.
No, it's very public. Everything on here would already be public information.
Okay, good. We actually have somebody from Graham Equestrian on the phone, Jay Filipino.
Oh, cool. I didn't see his name on here.
Philip Holmes, sorry. Yeah, and so he's happy to answer questions from folks about how he got this started and what he would suggest others do to get something started, if anybody has such a question. I'm sure Crystal will unmute him if he would like to just spontaneously speak.
I did.
Hi, how you guys doing? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Were there any questions? This was we did a lot of prep work before we even submitted this. In fact, the first time we submitted this, we withdrew it. We felt like we didn't have enough information and hadn't done enough background work, and so this was this year or this past year, getting this through was the second time we actually submitted this. Anyway, we're on a state park land, so we worked with DNR and the Maryland Park Service to resolve a number of issues before we even got to this point, and there were a number of things that we had to address, parking, a parking lot issue, and so on and so forth. But yeah, just like Michelle was saying, having all your information up front going into this and that took us 3 or 4 years to resolve a lot of the issues that we wanted to get resolved.
That's a long time, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will say your application was very well done and very well researched, and I recognized that it had gone in before, and and wasn't quite complete. So you definitely had everything that you needed this year, and it was really well done. Probably had more information on it than most do. So, you know, kudos to that. I'm not sure that all of them look that good, but I recognize too that if you are working between agencies like you are with the park, then it may be a little more complicated. You have to have more people sign off. So.
And did Graham equestrian, does it have a long-term lease with the park for the property?
So we did some research there. It's an indefinite, there is no time limit on it.
That's
So
pretty-
there is a lease, it's a lease, but it's indefinite. There's no term.
Okay, that's great. So the message I think we're hearing from that is this isn't something you embark on because you woke up in the middle of the night and said, hey, wouldn't it be great to get funds? It has to require some thought and intentional strategic thinking, or else you're going to find yourself in a bad situation, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And I assume, Delegate Guyton, that if you keep submitting something that isn't ready and keep having to withdraw it, that eventually your county delegation is going to be like, these people are fruitcakes. We don't want to deal with them. Maybe say it nicer than that.
You probably should be ready. You know, the county delegation does rank projects on both. I know on the House of Delegates side we have so many projects on our side that we do rank them. But I would like to say that everyone pays that much attention to it. I'm not sure they do.
Right.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to have the same project every year before that committee and before the budget committee. Mark Chang does not want to see your project every year. Yeah, be ready. And if you have trouble getting ready, certainly we will assist you. But I think Graham was a great example of an organization who was ready to roll. And we've had several of those. We have also in the past had organizations that kind of put it together at the last minute. It was more work on our part, which we're happy to do, but at the same time, we'd rather not have to. So.
Right. Now, would you recommend for the people who have county delegations that have meetings in their district, either before or during the session, would you recommend that people who are looking for an LBI attend those council delegation meetings?
Everybody attend their delegation meetings. We really want people to come. It does not hurt. For you to be there. It definitely doesn't. You can make the case. I'm so sorry about that phone. We don't have the opportunity necessarily to speak to the whole delegation about it. There's usually a committee that deals with it. We deal with the committee chair for Baltimore County. This year, that was Delegate Hill. So Delegate Hill came to us and said, what's your order of priority? And then the delegation, based on the information they had, put it in order. To be honest, my district was a little tough. Because we were a little split on what we wanted. But that's sometimes
right.
That's sometimes the way it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
so
are there any other questions from the audience?
Doesn't seem to be. I'll unmute everybody at this point. And as I am doing that, I am going to just reiterate, because I know that the vast majority of the nonprofits that are part of the equestrian community have started on people's farms that they own. So when the delegate says, you know, when you apply, that would be your nonprofit applying, and your nonprofit would have to have a lease with you yourself as a landowner. So Susie's Therapeutic Riding nonprofit has a lease with Sue, the landowner. Just want to make sure, because that is the majority of people that are.
To piggyback on that, there is no reason, and Delegate Guyton will correct me if I'm totally wrong, that you can't create a nonprofit to manage a program that you already have in order to pursue.
And you probably should be if you're asking for donations. So,
sure.
which has been one of the education processes that the Horse Council's done over the years, is helping people who are asking for donations because they're running some charitable type program, getting them structured so that they can legally do that. Everybody has the opportunity to unmute themselves if anybody would like to ask anything. Well,
hearing no comments.
Okay.
I consider that to mean that we covered every possible question somebody could have. And thank you, Delegate Guyton, for sticking it out to the end with us and for sharing so much information. And thank you, Corey, for your materials. And thank you, Jay, for your input. And thank you all for coming.